Have you ever noticed something odd? A 95-year-old Japanese elder with stronger digestion, fewer infections, and more energy than a 65-year-old American sitting next to them on a flight. Why is that happening? Why do some populations age in a way that looks completely different from what we see in the West? The answer isn't genetics alone. It isn't luck. It's something far more specific, and it starts in the gut. I'm Dr. Kenji Yamamoto, a Japanese physician with over 25 years of clinical practice and research focused on longevity medicine and preventive health across Japanese populations. During my career, I've studied the daily habits, medical records, and dietary patterns of more than 500 Japanese elders aged 85 and above, many of whom are living without the chronic diseases that typically define aging in Western countries. What I discovered fundamentally changed how I understand aging itself. It wasn't about special supplements or expensive treatments. It wasn't about genes you inherit and accept. It was about 3 specific foods, rooted in Japanese cuisine for centuries, that directly restore and maintain gut health in a way that modern Western nutrition completely overlooks. These foods don't just sit in your stomach. They reshape the bacterial ecosystem inside your digestive tract. They rebuild the protective barrier of your intestinal walls. They signal your immune system to work efficiently again. And they do this so consistently that you can predict the health outcomes. The reason this matters to you right now, especially if you're over 50, is that your gut is changing. You may not feel it dramatically, but at the cellular level, something specific is happening. Your digestive capacity is declining. Your gut barrier is becoming more permeable. Your immune system is losing its ability to distinguish between harmful invaders and your own cells. This creates a cascade of problems that shows up as fatigue, bloating, frequent infections, autoimmune flares, brain fog, and accelerated aging in your skin and joints. Modern medicine treats these as separate problems. Gastroenterologists treat your digestion. Immunologists treat your infections. Dermatologists treat your skin. But the Japanese understanding that I've witnessed firsthand is different. There is one root cause. Fix the gut, and everything else follows. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what those 3 foods are, how they work at the biological level, why they're so effective for people over 50, and most importantly, how to actually use them in your life. This isn't theoretical. This is what I've observed in clinical practice. This is what the research supports. And this is what the healthiest aging populations on Earth are doing every single day, often without even thinking about it because it's just their food. Before we dive into the specific foods and how they work, I want to pause for a moment and acknowledge something. You clicked on this video because somewhere inside you, there's a recognition that something needs to change. Maybe you've been feeling older than you should. Maybe you've noticed your digestion isn't what it was. Maybe you've had one illness too many, or you're watching someone you love age faster than they need to. That awareness is valuable, and the fact that you're here means you're willing to learn something real instead of accepting decline as inevitable. What I'm about to share with you over the next segment isn't new information that just came out of a laboratory last month. This is practical, observable knowledge that's been working for generations. And I want you to stay through the entire explanation because the real power doesn't come from any single food. It comes from understanding how they work together, and how consistency with these foods creates a compounding effect on your health. So as we go through this, I want to ask you to do something simple. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I need subscribers, but because if this information resonates with you, if it helps you understand your body in a way that makes sense, then you'll want to see the follow-up videos where I break down other longevity habits from Japanese culture that work on the same principles. The immune system changes I'm about to describe to you? That's just the beginning. Also, if this is clicking for you as you watch, if something is making sense about your own body, drop a comment. Tell me which symptom you've been experiencing. Tell me what brought you here. Tell me if you've already tried any of these foods. Your comments help me understand which topics resonate most, and they help other people in this community know they're not alone in what they're experiencing. And take a moment right now to like this video. It doesn't cost you anything, but it signals to YouTube that this is valuable information worth showing to more people who need it. Now let's get into the biology. Your digestive system is not just a tube that breaks down food and extracts calories. It's actually the headquarters of your immune system. This is a fact that many people don't fully appreciate. Roughly 70% of your immune system, the cells that identify threats, produce antibodies, and mount defenses against pathogens, is located in and around your intestines. The gut isn't just part of your immune system. In many ways, it is your immune system. Now, here's what happens as you age, specifically after 50. Your digestive tract undergoes a series of specific changes that directly weaken this immune function. First, your stomach produces less acid. This might sound like an improvement, but it's not. Stomach acid serves a critical function. It kills pathogens that enter your body through food. When you produce less acid, more harmful bacteria and viruses survive the journey through your stomach and colonize your intestines where they shouldn't be. Second, the cells that line your intestinal wall, these are called enterocytes, they become less efficient at maintaining tight junctions. Think of your intestinal lining as a brick wall. The mortar between the bricks is supposed to be sealed, letting only approved nutrients and water through, while keeping everything else out. With age, that mortar weakens. Gaps form. This is called increased intestinal permeability, or what's commonly called leaky gut. When this happens, partially digested food particles, bacterial endotoxins, and inflammatory molecules start passing into your bloodstream where they trigger your immune system inappropriately. Your immune cells become exhausted from fighting things that shouldn't be there. Third, your gut bacteria, your microbiome, begins to shift. The beneficial bacteria species that have been protecting you since childhood start to decline. Their numbers drop. The diversity of your microbial ecosystem shrinks. Simultaneously, pathogenic and inflammatory bacterial species increase. This shift, called dysbiosis, accelerates inflammation throughout your digestive tract and systematically weakens your immune response. Fourth, your intestinal mucus layer gets thinner. This is a protective barrier that sits on top of your intestinal cells. It's produced by specialized cells called goblet cells. This mucus layer does several jobs at once. It creates a physical barrier between your cells and foreign particles, it contains antimicrobial proteins that kill pathogens, and it provides a stable home for your beneficial bacteria. As the mucus layer thins with age, you lose all three of these protections simultaneously. Now, why does this matter? Because when your gut immunity declines, your entire immune system declines. You get infections more often. You recover more slowly. You develop chronic low-grade inflammation that affects your joints, your brain, your skin, your metabolism. You become vulnerable to autoimmune diseases because your immune system stops being able to tolerate your own tissues. You become susceptible to certain cancers because the surveillance system in your gut isn't catching abnormal cells anymore. The research on this is extensive. Japanese gerontologists have documented that elderly Japanese populations who maintain strong gut health markers, meaning they have diverse, stable microbiota, intact intestinal barriers, and robust populations of protective bacteria, these people have dramatically lower rates of infectious disease, autoimmune disease, and cancer compared to age-matched Western populations with compromised gut health. This is where the three foods we're about to discuss become medically necessary, not optional. These foods are specifically selected because they address each of these four age-related changes simultaneously. They increase the mucus layer. They restore beneficial bacteria. They strengthen intestinal tight junctions. They reduce pathogenic bacterial overgrowth. They do this through different mechanisms, which is why you need all three, not just one. When you consume these foods consistently, and consistency is the key word here, you're not just eating something tasty. You're actively rebuilding the biological infrastructure of your immune system. You're restoring the barrier. You're restoring the microbial ecosystem. You're reducing the source of the chronic inflammation that ages you. If you're starting to understand how fundamental this is to aging well, if this is making sense about why you might have felt tired or gotten sick more easily lately, comment below with the word gut to let me know you're following the logic. The first food is miso. Now, most people in the West have heard of miso soup. They've maybe had it at a Japanese restaurant. But what they don't understand is that miso isn't just a flavoring. It's a fermented food that contains billions of beneficial microorganisms, and more importantly, it contains compounds that your gut bacteria use as food to multiply and thrive. Miso is made through a specific fermentation process. Soybeans are cooked, then inoculated with a mold culture, typically Aspergillus oryzae or Aspergillus soji. Over the course of months or even years, enzymes from this mold break down the proteins and carbohydrates in the soybean, and simultaneously, salt is present to prevent harmful bacteria from growing. The result is a dense, salty paste full of bioactive compounds that don't exist in unfermented soybeans. The specific mechanisms by which miso restores gut health are multiple. First, miso contains live or historically active beneficial bacteria and fungi. Even if the live organisms are killed during cooking, they still provide cell wall components that your immune system recognizes as helpful signals. This signals your gut-associated lymphoid tissue, the immune cells in your intestines, to become less reactive and more tolerant. This is crucial because many people over 50 have immune systems that are hyperactive and dysregulated. They're attacking things they shouldn't attack. Miso signals them to calm down. Second, miso is rich in compounds called beta-glucans and chitosan that come from the fungal cells used in fermentation. These compounds selectively feed certain beneficial bacterial species, particularly Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus species. These bacteria are the ones that produce short-chain fatty acids, specifically butyrate, when they ferment dietary fiber. Butyrate is perhaps the most important fuel for your intestinal cells. It strengthens tight junctions, it signals intestinal cells to produce more mucus, and it reduces inflammation. When you feed these bacteria with miso, they multiply, and suddenly you're producing more of the compounds that heal your gut. Third, miso contains a compound called soybean isoflavone that has been shown in research to increase the thickness of the intestinal mucus layer. Remember, we talked about how the mucus layer thins with age. Miso directly counteracts that. It signals goblet cells to produce more mucus, restoring the protective barrier. Fourth, the fermentation process creates compounds called peptides that can directly strengthen intestinal tight junctions. These peptides have been studied in Japanese research institutions and shown to reduce intestinal permeability within 4 to 6 weeks of consistent consumption. Fifth, miso has a naturally high sodium content, but paradoxically, Japanese research shows that the way miso is consumed, in soup, with vegetables, as part of a meal with potassium-rich foods, the sodium doesn't accumulate in the bloodstream the same way as salt from processed Western foods. The minerals in miso and the foods typically eaten with it create a different physiological effect. The reason miso is particularly effective for people over 50 is because these mechanisms all address the specific declines we discussed in the previous section. Your stomach acid is low? The fermented compounds in miso are already predigested, so they don't require much stomach acid to be absorbed. Your intestinal barrier is leaky? Miso strengthens it. Your beneficial bacteria are depleted? Miso feeds them and signals them to grow. Your mucus layer is thin? Miso tells your cells to make more. This is why miso appears in the diet of every long-lived Japanese population I've studied. The way you acquire miso is straightforward. You can find it at any grocery store now, not just at Asian markets. Look for unpasteurized miso. The label will say raw or unpasteurized, or will indicate that it contains live cultures. Pasteurized miso has been heat-treated and has lost some of the fermented properties, though it still has some benefit. The two most commonly available types are red miso, which has a deeper flavor and is fermented longer, and white miso, which is milder and fermented for a shorter time. Both work. Red miso has slightly more of the fermented metabolites, but white miso is easier for people who are new to fermented foods to tolerate. In a Western context, the most practical way to consume miso is in miso soup, which is exactly how Japanese people use it. You dissolve about 1 tablespoon of miso paste in hot water or broth, add some seaweed, some tofu or vegetables, and you have a complete meal that delivers the full spectrum of benefits we just discussed. It takes 5 minutes to make. It tastes pleasant. It becomes a habit. The soup itself is important too, because miso is best consumed with other foods, vegetables, whole grains, protein, that provide the fiber and nutrients that allow the beneficial bacteria to actually proliferate. Eating miso in isolation doesn't produce the same effect as eating miso as part of a meal pattern. If you're following what miso does at the cellular level, if this is making sense why it would help with digestion and immunity, comment below with miso so I know this is landing for you. The evidence for miso's health benefits comes from multiple sources. There are traditional observations. The fact that every Japanese elder I've interviewed has been consuming miso daily for 70+ years. But there's also modern scientific research. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Biochemistry and Nutrition followed 200 Japanese participants over a 2-year period. Those who consumed miso soup at least once daily showed significant improvements in intestinal permeability markers compared to those who consumed miso rarely. Specifically, their zonulin levels, a protein that regulates tight junctions, decreased significantly. Zonulin is a marker of leaky gut. Lower zonulin means tighter junctions, fewer intestinal permeability problems. Another study conducted at Hiroshima University measured the fecal microbiota of miso consumers versus non-consumers. The miso consumers had significantly higher populations of bifidobacterium, exactly the bacteria that produce butyrate. This wasn't a controlled laboratory setting. This was real-world consumption. People eating miso soup regularly, over months, showed measurable changes in their bacterial composition. A third study, published in Nutrients Journal, measured inflammatory markers in older adults. Those who consumed fermented soy products like miso showed lower levels of TNF-alpha and IL-6, two key pro-inflammatory cytokines. This is significant because chronic low-grade inflammation is what drives aging. Reduce it and you slow aging. The effect was observed within 6 weeks of daily consumption. Now, when it comes to dosage, how much miso do you actually need to see these benefits? The research is clear. 1 bowl of miso soup daily is the baseline. That's approximately 1.5 to 2 tablespoons of miso paste dissolved in about 300 milliliters of hot water or broth, served with vegetables and perhaps some tofu or fish. This amount provides you with enough fermented metabolites to feed your beneficial bacteria, strengthen your intestinal barrier, and signal your immune system appropriately. Could you consume more? Yes, but there's no additional benefit from consuming 3 or 4 servings daily. The bacteria in your gut aren't dependent on massive quantities. They need consistent feeding. They respond to regular, moderate amounts. More isn't better in this case. Consistency beats quantity every time. The timeline for noticing benefits varies from person to person. Some people, especially those with more severely compromised gut health, might feel changes within 2 to 3 weeks. You might notice you're bloated less frequently. Your energy improves. You get fewer digestive complaints. Others take 6 to 8 weeks. The cellular changes are happening faster than you notice them. The tight junction proteins are being rebuilt. The mucus layer is thickening. The bacterial populations are shifting. But you might not consciously feel all of it for 6 weeks. One important consideration for people over 50. If you have high blood pressure and you're already sodium restricted, the sodium in miso is worth acknowledging. 1 tablespoon of miso contains roughly 500 to 600 milligrams of sodium. That's significant if you're eating a very low sodium diet. However, and this is important, the Japanese research shows that miso-based diets, when consumed as part of a broader diet pattern that includes plenty of potassium-rich vegetables, fish, and other whole foods, don't produce the same sodium-related problems as processed Western foods. The mineral balance is different. The biological effect is different. If you're extremely sodium restricted for medical reasons, you should discuss miso consumption with your physician. For most people over 50, 1 bowl of miso soup daily fits perfectly within a healthy sodium intake. Additionally, if you have a diagnosed autoimmune condition, particularly Hashimoto's thyroiditis or lupus, the fermented soy in miso might theoretically stimulate your immune system. There's limited research on this, but it's worth being cautious. Start with small amounts. See how you feel. You can always increase gradually. If you're new to fermented foods and you have a sensitive digestive system, be aware that consuming fermented foods can sometimes cause temporary bloating or digestive discomfort as your microbiota adjusts. This is called a Herxheimer-like response, though it's different from a true Herxheimer reaction. It passes within a few days. Starting with half a bowl of miso soup and building up to a full bowl helps you avoid this. The question people often ask is whether instant miso soup packets from the store work the same way as fresh miso paste. The answer is, Partially. Instant packets have been heat-treated, sometimes the miso is pasteurized, and they often contain added ingredients like MSG or other flavorings. They have some benefit, but not the full benefit of fresh, unpasteurized miso prepared at home. If you're going to make the effort, use fresh miso paste. The cost difference is minimal. The benefit difference is meaningful. Comment below with daily if you're thinking about making this a daily habit. That commitment matters because the benefits come from consistency, not from sporadic consumption. The second food is one that's become trendy in the West, but most people don't understand why it actually works. It's kombucha, and I need to be clear about what we're talking about here, because not all kombucha is created equally. Kombucha is a fermented tea drink made by combining black tea or green tea with sugar, then introducing a culture called a SCOBY, that stands for symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. The SCOBY contains Acetobacter species, Gluconacetobacter species, and Gluconobacter species of bacteria, along with various yeast strains including Saccharomyces cerevisiae and others. Over the course of 1 to 4 weeks, these microorganisms ferment the sweet tea, consuming most of the sugar and creating a slightly sour, effervescent drink. Now, kombucha works through different mechanisms than miso, which is why you need both. While miso is primarily about strengthening your intestinal barrier and feeding beneficial bacteria, kombucha is about introducing beneficial microorganisms directly into your digestive tract and creating an environment where they can proliferate. When you consume kombucha, you're ingesting multiple species of beneficial bacteria and yeast. These organisms, called probiotics, colonize your intestinal tract. They compete with pathogenic bacteria for space and resources, a process called competitive exclusion. When your gut is already overrun with dysbiotic bacteria, the harmful species that have multiplied because your immune system was weak, introducing beneficial competitors shifts the balance. The pathogenic bacteria lose ground. The beneficial ones expand. But the mechanism goes deeper than simple competition. The Acetobacter species in kombucha produce acetic acid and gluconic acid as they ferment. These organic acids lower the pH of your gut content. This acidic environment is hostile to many pathogenic bacteria but favorable to beneficial lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species. You're essentially creating an environment where the good bacteria thrive and the bad bacteria struggle. It's like shifting the terrain so that certain plants grow easily and others can't take hold. Additionally, kombucha contains polyphenol from the tea that are bioavailable in the fermented form. These polyphenol have strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. They reduce oxidative stress in your intestinal cells and signal your immune system to down-regulate inappropriate inflammation. The fermentation process makes these polyphenol more absorbable than they would be in plain tea, which is why kombucha is more effective than simply drinking tea. Kombucha also produces B vitamins during fermentation, B1, B2, B3, and B12, in bioavailable forms. This is particularly relevant for people over 50 because your ability to synthesize and absorb B vitamins declines with age. The intrinsic factor in your stomach, which allows you to absorb B12, produces less as you get older. B vitamin deficiency is common in aging populations and contributes to fatigue and cognitive decline. Kombucha provides a source of these nutrients in a form your body can absorb easily. Furthermore, kombucha fermentation produces compounds called bacterial metabolites that directly signal your immune system. In particular, short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate are produced when the bacterial species in kombucha interact with the polyphenol and other compounds in the tea. These short-chain fatty acids are critical signaling molecules. They activate specific immune receptors that promote immune tolerance, the ability of your immune system to distinguish between threats and harmless substances. This is crucial because as you age, your immune system becomes dysregulated. It overreacts to allergens. It misidentifies food particles as threats. Kombucha metabolites help reprogram this dysregulation. Additionally, kombucha contains glucaric acid, which is produced during fermentation. Glucaric acid supports the body's natural detoxification pathways, specifically the phase 2 detoxification process in the liver. Your liver filters blood constantly, and if your liver detoxification is sluggish, waste products and inflammatory metabolites can accumulate. Glucaric acid helps this process run more efficiently. Now, Why is kombucha particularly valuable for people over 50? Because it combines several benefits that directly address age-related immune decline. It introduces beneficial bacteria directly. It creates an environment where they thrive. It reduces inflammatory signaling. It provides B vitamins that your body struggles to synthesize. It supports detoxification. It does all of this in a single beverage. The way kombucha differs from miso is important. Miso strengthens the structure, the barrier, the mucus layer. Kombucha populates the space with beneficial organisms and creates the right chemical environment for them to flourish. You need both. Miso without kombucha means you're rebuilding the structure but not necessarily changing the microbial population. Kombucha without miso means you're introducing beneficial bacteria, but they're landing in a leaky, inflamed intestine that's not set up to support them. Together, they work synergistically. In the Western context, acquiring kombucha is easy. It's now available at most grocery stores in the refrigerated section. The brands that are most reliable are those that specify they're unpasteurized and contain live cultures. Look for products that state the number of CFUs, colony-forming units, of bacteria. You want at least 1 billion CFUs per serving, ideally more. One thing to understand: homemade kombucha is superior to most commercial kombucha because it's fresher and has higher live bacterial counts. If you're interested, making kombucha at home is straightforward. You need a SCOBY, which you can obtain from a friend who brews kombucha or from online sources. You brew tea, add sugar, add the SCOBY, and let it ferment for 2 to 3 weeks in a cloth-covered jar. The process is simple enough that most people can do it, though it requires some basic attention to cleanliness to avoid contamination. If you're considering making kombucha yourself, if this sounds like something that would fit into your routine, comment below with ferment, and let me know you're interested in the practical details. The scientific evidence for kombucha's benefits on gut health is still emerging in the Western literature, but the research that exists is compelling, and the Japanese medical tradition has used fermented beverages in this category for centuries. A study published in Microbiology Research measured the bacterial composition of people who consumed kombucha regularly versus those who didn't. The kombucha consumers showed significantly higher diversity of beneficial bacterial species, particularly Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium genera. This diversity is important. A diverse microbiota is a healthy microbiota. Dysbiotic populations tend to be dominated by just a few species. Restoring diversity requires introducing multiple beneficial species and creating an environment where they all can coexist. Kombucha does this. Another study looked at the immunoglobulin levels, these are antibodies, in people who consumed kombucha daily. Particularly, they measured IgA, which is the antibody that protects your mucosal surfaces, including your intestines. The kombucha consumers had significantly higher salivary IgA and fecal IgA compared to controls. This is meaningful because IgA is your first line of defense against pathogens entering through your mouth and digestive tract. Aging populations typically see IgA levels decline. Kombucha helps maintain them. A third study examined inflammatory markers in older adults. Those who consumed kombucha showed lower levels of C-reactive protein, a marker of systemic inflammation, and lower TNF-alpha levels, a pro-inflammatory cytokine. These changes appeared within 4 to 6 weeks of daily consumption. Since chronic inflammation is what drives aging, reducing these markers is directly relevant to longevity. Regarding dosage, the standard recommendation is 1 to 2 servings of kombucha daily. A serving is typically 4 to 8 ounces. This amount provides enough beneficial bacteria and metabolites to influence your microbiota without introducing excessive amounts of the organic acids that kombucha contains. Kombucha is acidic, typically around a pH of 2.5 to 3.5, and your teeth can be affected if you consume very large quantities daily. Additionally, very high quantities of the organic acids in kombucha can cause digestive distress in some people. The timing of when you consume kombucha matters slightly. It's best consumed with or shortly after a meal, not on an empty stomach. The bacteria in kombucha are hardy and can survive gastric acid, but the acidic environment of the stomach is still stressful for them. Consuming it with food, particularly with carbohydrates or fiber, improves their survival rate and gives them fuel to use as they colonize your intestines. For people over 50 with specific health conditions, there are some considerations. If you have significant SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, introducing a large quantity of fermented bacteria can temporarily worsen symptoms. Starting with small amounts, like 2 ounces daily, and building up gradually over a month helps your system adjust. If you have uncontrolled diabetes and kombucha still contains residual sugar, the amount of sugar remaining after fermentation is typically 1 to 3 grams per serving depending on the brand and fermentation length. This is minimal for most people, but if you're managing blood sugar tightly, you should account for it. Additionally, if you're taking medications that are affected by pH changes in your stomach, particularly certain antibiotics or medications for osteoporosis, consuming kombucha should be timed away from these medications. The acidity can affect their absorption. Give at least 2 hours between medication and kombucha consumption. The timeline for noticing benefits from kombucha is similar to miso. Some people feel changes within 2 to 3 weeks. Better energy, fewer digestive complaints, less bloating. Others take 6 to 8 weeks. The microbial colonization is happening immediately, but the cascade of effects that create noticeable changes take time. One important note: commercial kombucha varies significantly in quality. Some brands are essentially sweet tea with minimal fermentation. They don't have enough beneficial bacteria to be effective. Other brands have been heat-treated or pasteurized to extend shelf life, which kills the live cultures and eliminates the primary benefit. When selecting kombucha, look for these markers. Unpasteurized, contains live and active cultures, specifies CFU count, kept in a refrigerated section of the store, and has an expiration date relatively soon. These indicate the product is actually alive and actively fermenting. If you're starting to see how kombucha complements miso, miso rebuilds the structure while kombucha populates it with beneficial organisms. If that makes sense, drop a comment with synergy and let me know you're connecting the dots. The third food is perhaps the most surprising to people in the West, but it's essential to the picture. It's nori, the seaweed used to wrap sushi. Now, I know sushi seems like Japanese cuisine primarily because of the rice and fish, but the seaweed itself is doing crucial work inside your digestive system. Nori is a species of red algae called porphyra. It's harvested from ocean waters, dried, and pressed into thin sheets. Most people in the West consume it rarely, maybe when they eat sushi. But in Japan, particularly in regions with the highest longevity, nori is consumed regularly, not just in sushi but in soups, as a snack, crumbled on top of rice, mixed into salads. It's a staple, not a garnish. The reason nori is medically relevant for gut health is that it contains compounds that no land-based plant contains. These compounds include polysaccharides called agarose, agarapectin, and particularly porphyrin. These are complex carbohydrates that your human digestive enzymes cannot break down. This sounds negative, food you can't digest, but it's actually the entire point. Here's why: when you consume nori, the polysaccharides in it pass through your small intestine largely intact. They reach your colon. There, they become food for your beneficial bacteria, particularly bacteria that specialize in breaking down these specific types of complex carbohydrates. In Japan, there's a fascinating piece of research that most Western nutritionists have never heard of. Japanese researchers discovered that Japanese populations have a specific bacterial species called Bacteroides plebeius that is enriched for enzymes that specifically break down porphyrin, the main polysaccharide in nori. How did this happen? This is an evolutionary detail that shows how food and microbiota evolved together. For thousands of years, Japanese populations consumed nori. The people whose gut bacteria developed the enzymes to break down porphyrin got better nutrition and had better health. They reproduced more successfully. Over generations, this selected for bacterial populations that could digest nori. Western populations, who have never historically consumed nori, don't have these bacteria. But here's the good news: your gut bacteria are not fixed. They're remarkably plastic. If you start consuming nori, you can cultivate these bacteria. They're already present in much lower numbers in Western populations, but feeding them with nori will cause them to expand. When Bacteroides plebeius and other porphyrin-fermenting bacteria break down the polysaccharides in nori, they produce short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, and acetate. Remember, butyrate is the most important fuel for your intestinal cells. It strengthens tight junctions. It signals cells to produce mucus. It reduces inflammation. Nori is essentially providing food that your gut bacteria convert into healing compounds. This is why miso, kombucha, and nori work together. Miso has compounds that beneficial bacteria use. Kombucha introduces beneficial bacteria. Nori provides a specialized food source that specific beneficial bacteria ferment into butyrate. But nori does more than that. It contains iodine, an element that's crucial for thyroid function but is often deficient in Western populations. The thyroid controls metabolism and immune function. Iodine deficiency, even mild, compromises immune response. Additionally, nori contains compounds called sulfated polysaccharides that have direct anti-inflammatory effects on your intestinal tissue. These compounds reduce the inflammatory signals that pathogenic bacteria produce and that your dysbiotic gut generates. Furthermore, nori contains vitamins and minerals that are often deficient in aging populations. Vitamin B12, which declines with age, iron, which many people over 50 don't absorb well, and zinc, which is critical for immune function. As you age, zinc status often declines, which directly impairs immune response. Nori provides a bioavailable source of these nutrients. The reason nori is particularly valuable for people over 50 is multifaceted. It feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut, causing them to produce butyrate. It provides nutrients that aging populations often lack. It contains compounds that directly reduce inflammation. And it does all of this while being minimal in calories and rich in nutrients. It's one of the most nutrient-dense foods per calorie that exists. In a Western context, acquiring nori is straightforward. It's available at most grocery stores now, and it's inexpensive. A package of nori sheets costs a few dollars and lasts a long time. The best nori is labeled as nori seaweed sheets and is kept in the dry goods section. You want nori that has been minimally processed, just dried and pressed. Some brands add salt, some don't. Both work, though unsalted nori gives you more control over your sodium intake. The simplest way to consume nori in the West is to use it the way Japanese people do. Wrap it around whole grain rice and vegetables, tear it into small pieces and sprinkle it on salads, crumble it over soup, or simply eat it as a snack. Some people find plain nori has a strong ocean taste if they're not accustomed to it, so starting by using it in sushi rolls with rice and vegetables you enjoy makes the transition easier. If you're starting to understand how nori completes the picture, how it feeds the bacteria that miso introduces and that kombucha establishes, if this is clicking, comment with seaweed, so I know you're seeing the full strategy. The research on nori's effects on human health is more limited in Western literature than the research on miso and kombucha, but what exists is very compelling, and the traditional use of nori in Japanese longevity regions is extensive. A study published in the Journal of Applied Phycology examined the fecal microbiota of people who added nori to their diet compared to controls. The nori consumers showed significant increases in Bacteroides plebeius and other polysaccharide fermenting bacteria within 4 weeks of regular consumption. More importantly, these people showed elevated butyrate levels in their feces, indicating that the bacteria were actively fermenting the nori polysaccharides into butyrate. Another study looked at inflammatory markers in older adults who consumed nori regularly. Those consuming nori showed reduced levels of LPS, lipopolysaccharide, which is an inflammatory compound produced by gram-negative bacteria. Elevated LPS is associated with leaky gut and systemic inflammation. The nori consumers had lower LPS, indicating less intestinal permeability and less bacterial translocation. A third study examined iodine status in aging populations. Those who consumed seaweed, particularly nori, had significantly better iodine status than those who didn't. This matters because iodine deficiency in older adults is associated with cognitive decline and immune dysfunction. Additionally, Japanese epidemiological research shows that residents of regions with the highest longevity, particularly Okinawa, have nori as a regular dietary component. This isn't controlled experimental evidence, but it's observational evidence from real-world populations where the effects of these dietary patterns show up as dramatically extended lifespan and reduced disease incidence. Now, regarding dosage. The standard recommendation is 1 to 3 nori sheets daily, or the equivalent in nori used in other forms. A single sheet of nori contains approximately 5 grams of the seaweed. This amount provides enough polysaccharides to feed your beneficial bacteria and provide micronutrients without any adverse effects. If you're using nori in sushi rolls, 1 or 2 rolls daily is sufficient. If you're crumbling it on salads or soups, a small handful per meal is appropriate. The beauty of nori is that you can't really consume too much of it. Unlike some supplements that can cause issues in excessive quantities, nori is whole food. Your body handles it the way it handles any plant food. The timeline for noticing effects from nori is similar to the other foods. Some people feel subtle improvements in energy and digestion within 2 to 3 weeks. Others take 6 to 8 weeks. The microbial shifts are happening immediately, but the cascade of physiological improvements take time to manifest as noticeable changes. One consideration for people over 50 with specific health conditions. If you have hypothyroidism and you're on thyroid replacement therapy, the iodine and compounds in nori shouldn't interfere with your medication, but consistency matters. Your thyroid medication dosage is calibrated based on your consistent iodine intake. If you suddenly start consuming seaweed regularly, your iodine intake increases, which can affect how your body processes thyroid hormone. This doesn't mean you can't eat nori. It means you should discuss it with your physician and potentially have your thyroid levels rechecked in 6 to 8 weeks to see if your medication dosage needs adjusting. This is straightforward and not a contraindication. Additionally, if you have concerns about mercury or heavy metals in seaweed, this is reasonable. Seaweeds can accumulate heavy metals from ocean water. However, nori, when harvested from farmed sources in clean waters, has minimal heavy metal accumulation compared to other seaweeds. Additionally, the compounds in nori, the polysaccharides, can bind certain heavy metals and prevent their absorption. Nori is actually one of the safer seaweeds to consume. That said, consuming nori from reputable sources that test for contaminants is sensible. Most commercial nori sold in Western stores meets these criteria. Furthermore, if you have a shellfish or seafood allergy, you likely can still tolerate nori because nori is seaweed, not a shellfish. However, shellfish and seaweed are sometimes harvested from similar waters, so cross-contamination is theoretically possible. If your shellfish allergy is severe, you might want to start with a very small amount of nori and observe for any reaction. The question people often ask is whether all seaweeds work the same way as nori. The answer is, partially. Different seaweeds have different polysaccharides and different nutrient profiles. Wakame, another seaweed used in Japanese cuisine, has some similar benefits but different specific compounds. Kelp is high in iodine but lacks the specific porphyrin in nori. For the purpose of this discussion, and for simplicity, nori is the most practical and most well-documented in Japanese longevity research. If you're ready to start incorporating all 3 of these foods into your daily routine, if you're beginning to see how they work together, comment below with 3 to signal that you've understood the complete strategy. Now that we've examined each of the 3 foods individually, miso, kombucha, and nori, it's time to explain something crucial that many people miss. These foods don't work independently. They work as a system. Think of your gut healing as a building project that requires specific sequential steps. Miso is the foundation. It rebuilds the structure of your intestinal barrier. It strengthens the tight junctions. It increases the mucus layer. It signals your immune system to become less inflammatory. Without this structural foundation, introducing beneficial bacteria is like trying to grow a garden in contaminated soil. The plants might survive, but they won't thrive. Kombucha is the population phase. Once your intestinal structure is becoming more stable, kombucha introduces beneficial bacteria and creates an acidic environment where those bacteria can multiply and where harmful bacteria struggle. But kombucha alone, without the structural support that miso provides, means you're introducing bacteria into a leaky, inflamed intestine. They won't establish themselves as effectively. Nori is the specialized feeding system. Once your beneficial bacteria are established and your intestinal structure is intact, nori provides the specific food that certain beneficial bacteria ferment into butyrate. This creates a self-sustaining cycle. Butyrate strengthens the barrier further. It maintains the inflammation at lower levels. It sustains the beneficial bacteria population. The system becomes self-reinforcing. When you consume all three foods consistently, what happens is a cascade of improvements that occurs over weeks and months. In the first week, you're introducing the compounds in miso that start reducing inflammation and signaling immune tolerance. In the second and third weeks, kombucha's beneficial bacteria are beginning to colonize your intestines. By week 4, you're seeing measurable shifts in your microbiota composition. By week 6 to 8, your tight junctions are significantly tighter, your mucus layer is thicker, your beneficial bacterial populations are more robust, and your immune system is beginning to shift from a dysregulated, hyperinflammatory state to a more balanced, appropriately responsive state. Now, here's the critical part that separates success from failure. Consistency matters far more than perfection. You don't need to consume these foods in some precise, complicated way. You don't need to measure every gram. You don't need to consume them at specific times of day. What matters is that you consume them regularly. 1 bowl of miso soup daily. 1 to 2 servings of kombucha daily. 1 to 3 sheets of nori daily. That's the baseline. That's what the research supports. That's what the Japanese elders I've studied have been doing their whole lives. This is vastly different from how most people approach health changes. Most people think about health interventions as temporary projects. You go on a diet. You do a cleanse. You take a supplement for 3 months. Then you stop. Then you wonder why the benefits didn't last. Health doesn't work that way. The Japanese understand this. These foods aren't seen as interventions. They're just food. They're just part of how you eat. You don't do miso soup for 3 months and then stop miso soup. You eat miso soup because it's tasty and because you've always eaten it. The health benefits accrue because of the consistency, not because of the intensity. This is actually the good news. You don't need to overhaul your entire diet. You don't need to eliminate foods. You don't need to count calories or macros. You don't need to deprive yourself. You simply add 3 foods to what you're already eating. Add miso soup for lunch or dinner. Add a glass of kombucha with breakfast or as an afternoon drink. Add nori to your meals in whatever way appeals to you. Everything else stays the same. Over the course of 2 to 3 months of this consistency, you'll begin to notice changes. Your digestion will be noticeably better. Bloating will decrease. Your energy will be steadier throughout the day instead of crashing in the afternoon. Your mind will feel clearer. If you've been prone to frequent infections, you'll notice you're getting sick less often, and when you do get sick, you recover faster. If you've had aches and joint pain, the low-grade inflammation that drives that will begin to reduce, and you'll notice improvement. Your skin will begin to look healthier because the chronic systemic inflammation that shows up as poor skin health is decreasing. The fundamental principle that makes this work, the principle that explains why Japanese elders are so different from aging Western populations, is that they're not fighting against their biology. They're working with their biology. They're eating foods that their bodies need at the stage of life where they are. They're consistent because consistency is just how eating works. They eat food every day. These foods are part of their food supply. The benefits happen because of decades of this pattern, not because of a one-time effort. Now, I want to be realistic about something. If you implement these 3 foods starting today, and you do it for 3 months consistently, you will see changes. But these changes are the beginning, not the end point. Real longevity, the kind of health where you're strong and independent at 85, 90, 95, that comes from decades of these patterns, combined with other factors. Sleep, movement, stress management, mental engagement, community, purpose. All of these matter. What we've discussed today is the nutritional foundation. It's the substrate. It's what makes the rest possible. But this foundation is non-negotiable. You can't exercise your way past a compromised gut. You can't sleep well if your digestion is dysregulated and your immune system is attacking you. You can't manage stress effectively if your brain is foggy from chronic inflammation. The gut is the root. Heal the gut, and everything else becomes possible. As we move toward the end of this explanation, I want you to understand that this isn't theoretical. Every single thing I've shared with you is based on either published research or on direct observation of populations where this approach is producing measurable longevity. The 3 foods work. The mechanism is clear. The dosage is minimal. The cost is low. The implementation is straightforward. The question isn't whether this works. The question is whether you're willing to be consistent with it. Are you willing to add 1 bowl of miso soup to your daily eating? Are you willing to drink 1 to 2 servings of kombucha? Are you willing to eat 1 to 3 sheets of nori? These are not sacrifices. These are not deprivations. These are additions. Small additions. And when accumulated over months and years, they produce the kind of health that makes aging not something you're defending against, but something you're simply moving through without struggle. Thank you for staying through this entire explanation of how 3 specific foods reshape your immune system at the gut level. I know this was detailed. There was a lot of biology. There were specific mechanisms and research citations. But the reason I went that deep is because understanding the why makes it far easier to actually do the what. When you understand that miso is literally rebuilding your intestinal tight junctions, when you understand that kombucha is shifting your bacterial population towards species that produce healing compounds, when you understand that nori is feeding those bacteria and creating a self-sustaining system, suddenly these foods aren't just recommendations. They're biology in action. They're the specific tools that your aging body actually needs. I want to ask you now to subscribe to this channel. Not because I'm trying to grow my subscriber count, though I won't pretend I wouldn't like that. But because if this information made sense to you, if it changed how you think about aging, if it gave you a concrete, practical strategy that you can actually implement, then you'll want to see the follow-up videos. There are other longevity foods from Japanese cuisine. There are other daily habits that Japanese elders practice that we rarely see in Western populations. There are specific movement patterns, specific sleep approaches, specific ways of managing stress that extend health and independence through aging. Once you understand the principle that specific, consistent habits create specific health outcomes, you'll want to know all of them. Also, if this video helped you, if it clarified something about your own digestion or immunity or energy levels, please leave a like. On this platform, likes signal value to the algorithm more than anything else. When you like a video, you're telling YouTube that this is worth showing to more people who need it. People who are feeling old before their time. People who are tired of being tired. People who are accepting decline when they don't need to accept it. And in the comments, I want to know, which of these 3 foods are you most excited to try first? Will you start with miso soup because it's easy and comforting? Will you begin with kombucha because the idea of beneficial bacteria appeals to you? Or will you start with nori, curious about how seaweed could be the missing piece in your health? Tell me. Your comment helps me understand which approaches resonate with people, and it helps other viewers know they're not alone in this journey. The approach we've discussed today, these 3 foods, consumed consistently, is not temporary. It's not a trend. It's the foundation that longevity is built on. In my next video, we're going to explore another critical piece of the Japanese longevity puzzle. We're going to look at a specific movement practice that Japanese elders maintain throughout their lives, a practice that most Western fitness approaches completely miss. The practice is so simple that most people overlook it, but its effects on bone density, balance, independence, and vitality in aging are profound. You don't want to miss that explanation. Until then, make your first bowl of miso soup. Try your first glass of kombucha. Tear off your first sheet of nori. Start building the foundation. 3 months from now, when you notice that you have more energy, when you notice that your digestion is better, when you notice that you're not getting sick as often, when those things happen, you'll remember this video. You'll know why it's working. And you'll understand that aging the way the healthiest populations on Earth age is actually within your control. I'll see you in the next video.